Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Rumble. So, evidently, this is on Paramount Plus, but I will go out of my way to find you a convenient app. You can watch this for free, guaranteed, as long as you go into these things that I'm going to mention here. So, right now, currently, the second recording, you can go on Google Play Store if you have a mobile device, and there, in fact, search the word movie apps. And you can find an app called Play HD TV and download that app and be able to watch seemingly almost anything free as long as it's a new release or it's a old movie or whichever. Like, you might go out of your way to exhaust the search engine and not be able to find something, but it's very rare. You can also Google search an app called Letters C Movies, and so it would be one letter and one word. And you should be able to go and download that app, and there, in fact, with the combination of those two things, you should basically be able to pretty much see anything that you want. Really, even to the point of, like, I would also recommend, like, a TV Crush or some other kind of apps at some point that could also just kind of help also with you being able to find everything that you want and more. So, Rumble, how did I feel about this movie? What was the kind of a approach or appeal or reason why I was to justifiably watch this film? Well, like the idea of the movie where you have this kind of smaller coach, but this massive monster that is to be wrestling. I was like, you know what? This sounds interesting. There's something about this that feels kind of like it feels like Hugh Jackman's Real Steel movie. It kind of has that kind of approach to it. I think that was my main appeal to this movie was just stuff like Real Steel. And then I went in and realized, oh, this is a WWE Studios movie, so this is probably not going to be that good. Because a lot of times, like, the movies just aren't that good. And so, for a lot of people, like, that is going through and watching this movie, you'll get certain WWE voices like Roman Reigns, you'll get Becky Lynch, and like I feel like that's kind of like the bulk of voices. They might slip some here and there or whatever, but yeah. So we also had like Tony Danza, the guy from Who's the Boss, as the Siggy coach, the coach of the character Tentacular. Tentacular. There we go. Goofy names in here, but also goofy moves that don't even sound like wrestling moves to me. And not only that, but then we eventually have our main character, Steve, who we find out is to actually have a real kind of prodigy status or something like that. We end up having Steve, who seems to be this kind of loser wrestler, but then we end up finding out that he is some dancer-ish like character. And once we kind of find out that he's this like dancer wrestler character, that to me just like it really made the movie start to get really goofy. And I don't know, I just like I kind of lost interest at that point. Like I kind of was like, ugh, like we have to have like the worst, goofiest gimmick that is to be like pretty much like Fandango or any number of people that would has probably gotten like released through having some bizarrish dance gimmick that made no sense. Very few wrestlers have had a massive tenure with them dancing away. So, anyways, going into this film, like, I like at first there is some kind of potential here. There, like it is a fun film. More than likely, we're probably realizing what the target audiences of this is, to really just be like this young kid kind of film. And I just really had fun watching this movie overall, because we end up having two people who are trying to be like their fathers and realize that that is a mistake and they should be more like themselves. And that's the kind of real pull away from this movie, is that people should just be themselves and not try to live up to some legacy or try and uh, basically, like, we have a point in this movie where Steve is getting trained by Winnie, and Winnie's training him, or when he's training Steve, like seemingly the way of which that his father was to be trained, and that isn't working, and so she's she's going and doing this kind of workout thing that won't really work for Steve, and so she finally figures out to adjust this and customize the workout to fit what Steve would eventually get motivated to want to do. And so I kind of like that. I kind of like how it just seems like we're not going through meaningless uh, kind of workout things. And because there's a lot of times where, like, I kind of feel that there's some movies that aren't really unique. They're just kind of going through the motions of giving you the same old, same old. And not saying that this like goes out of its way to try to be different, but like I can appreciate this movie for at least taking a risk here. A weird, goofy risk that to me does, like, for me personally doesn't pay out. But like I can see how possibly for a young audience that this movie is obviously targeted, like I can see it much more working out for that, because it seems like everywhere is not really like everywhere. It's just to appeal to a kid. It's not to appeal to adults. It's not appealing to like teenagers. It's or young teens. It's really just to appeal to kids now. But I think that could have like always been a thing, and I never realized it until now, until being much older and realizing that like they're, but like it's much more obvious now that they're catering to a certain audience, whereas before like you wouldn't have known, and it's harder to have figured that out. But now it like obviously there is a much more catering to a certain audience, and like it isn't much of a family kind of film where it's like, hey, like yeah, like the kids will get something out of it, but also so will the adults who have to be going out of the way to watch this film, so on and so forth. But there might be some older folks that might have also gone onto this one also, because they're like, yeah, like this looked kind of unique. I was like, what is this? And plus also, people probably have Paramount Plus and didn't have to pay for this film or whatever. I don't know what the whole subscription deal of that is. So they're probably like, yeah, I conveniently watch this movie for free. And so I was like, meh. So with that said, I'm gonna go out of my way to just go and double five this one. Just go into spoilers about this one, just and then just kind of wrap it up. I'm gonna go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the timing and to spoil this movie. So the very beginning of this film, we have Winnie who is trying to run to make it to the arena or the stadium, whatever it's called. So Winnie is going on and seeing her restaurant guy, who is to be called Fred. And so eventually Winnie is to make her way to the stadium, and then Fred is sitting next to her. It's like, yeah, like, yeah, like I can't wait for this to pop off. So the first match ends up being with Tentacular, who is to be voiced actually by Terry Crews. I'm like, man, yeah, that's so cool to have like Terry Crews be like being in a movie or animated film. And so we end up having Tentacular, who is to go up against this big, massive threat that is to be called King George. I thought it was like to be called King Gorge in this movie. I don't know. There's kind of, I'm sure, riddled with like typos and whatever for this product that they were trying to sell for this movie. Because like I saw a thing here that says axe hammer, and the axe hammer is the female thing, and it's saying axe hammer for Mac or the announcers, one of the monster announcer, because I think it's Mick and Mac. I think are the announcers or the commentators. So we end up having Tentacular fighting this king who is to be the world heavyweight champion for this promotion for the WM something. I don't know. I didn't go out of my way to find out what the company thing was because I'm like, this is a movie. Who cares what it is? Unless they don't say it, I don't really care. Just me being honest. So we have Tentacular going and doing all these moves, and so Winnie is to obviously find out that this king character is to have some kind of tell, and then she's going and waiting till there's to be a round break because I guess weirdly in this wrestling competition, like they go and they have rounds. So I'm like, this kind of feels more like UFC in some kind of ways because technically there is kind of collegiate or amateur like wrestling in there, technically. Because you do have like things like takedowns and you do have submissions, and so it's basically barely wrestling because the moves don't sound like wrestling. But so we go into this round, and so when he had to tell Tentacular, hey, like Siggy, tell Tentacular that the king has a tell that he licks his nose a lot, and so Tentacular's like, really, he does, and immediately we have the king, this kind of big dog like character, licking his nose like, aha. So we go on and have Tentacular go on and beat this king and then win this championship belt. He's like, yeah, I did it. And then immediately we end up having Tentacular, who's doing a little promo work here, and he's going on and telling that he is to thank everybody of Stoker, this town, but he's going to go and move on to Slitherpool to go and work for their promotion. So I'm like, so this is kind of like indie wrestling a little bit, where there's kind of territories and certain towns have certain things. But like, I guess you have this belt just going to other places, I guess. So it's kind of this weird, goofy, kind of like real steel kind of thing where you have a number of places that have like the like so much about this feels like a blatant real steel ripoff. So Tentacular is basically turning on this town and deciding to leave it, and so now everybody's up in the arms. They're like, "Oh my God, Tentacular is gone, and we don't have any like big wig wrestlers, and like, what are we gonna do?" And so the mayor comes out and he's like, "Well, hey, like guys, like I guess since Tentacular has left us, we're just gonna have to figure out a way to just sell this arena, this stadium, and we're just gonna have to just eventually just rely on our bobblehead company to just kind of make ends meet for this town. And so Winnie is like, no, like we can't do that, because Winnie was to have her father be like the big head honcho of this town. He, of course, was to be this guy who's to be called Jimbo and have a world champion called Rayburn go and hold this world belt for a really long time. But then all of a sudden there was to be some out to sea accident where they were to be lost forever and killed, supposedly, I guess. To where they were to now forced to kind of have just Siggy, who was Jimbo's kind of assistant coach, take over and eventually take on this new talent called Tentacular. So we go on here, and so Winnie is to now have to scout new, fresh talent to bring a wrestler to this place to then go on and find the next big thing for this promotion. So Winnie goes off to this kind of grungy, like back alley wrestling organization that, of course, is to be held by Lady Mayhem. And so we have Winnie, who is to go on and is to spot certain talent, and she ends up seeing this this woman wrestler called Axe Hammer, and she's like, like this girl is strong, really, really strong. And of course, this character is voiced by Becky Lynch. So Winnie is to eventually, after this match is over, after like Axe Hammer goes and easily takes out this smaller monster out and flings it and just like obviously beats this character. Winnie goes off to see Axe Hammer to say like, hey, like how about, like how about teaming up with me, because a win is a Winnie, or a win is a win is a Winnie, is what she says. So Axe Hammer just laughs at her, and then we just have Winnie, who just asks every wrestler at that point, and they all just laugh at her, and they're like, no. So we have, of course, Winnie, who just looking at the bottom of the barrel for some kind of wrestler at some point. And so this one guy is to say, hey, like, I'm putting all my money on this loser wrestler who always loses, and I'm hoping that this time around he's going to win. Because, like, it's a 1 in a million kind of shot. So, when he goes and checks who this wrestler is, and this wrestler, this monster wrestler, let's remind people that it's a monster wrestler, is to be Steve the Stupendous. And Steve the Stupendous is to always lose. So Steve is going on and wrestling Dennis, or like they call him like Korg, because he's kind of like a boar looking character. So we go on and we have Steve kind of going and telling like this other wrestler, like, hey man, like I'm on the top rope, but I don't think I can jump where you are. And the guy's like, seriously, then why'd you get up there? And he's like, well, hey, just come closer and closer to me and I'll jump on you, and we'll do it that. So we have it where all of a sudden Winnie is to not give a rip about this match, because this match does not matter to her. So Winnie is consistently trying to interrupt this match so that way Winnie can talk to Steve, because Winnie knows Steve, because Steve actually was Ray Burns' son, and Steve went off to escape like Stoker because he didn't want to be compared to his father, or he didn't want to have to fill his father's shoes or live in his shadow, yada yada yada. So Steve changed his name to hide the fact that like he's gonna still do wrestling, but not under his father's name. So Steve is to go and try to do this match, but he accidentally clotheslines his opponent, and his opponent ends up getting knocked out. And so Steve's like pretending that this other opponent is choking him or submitting him or whatever. And but the ref is still counting out, so like he's counting to 10, and so this character, since he's knocked out, we have Steve who wins this match by accident, to where now Lady Mayhem is so upset with Steve because it's like, hey, you cost me a lot of chunk of change because you had won this match and you were supposed to lose. So we're starting to see that, like, even in a kids movie, they're of course telling the youth that wrestling technically is fake. That, yeah, there is times when, like, you do have, like, a person that is to, like, obviously win a match, but then there's also times where you, like, can know that someone is going to lose a match, too. Because, like, oh, the bad guy has to lose here. Oh, obviously. And so there's a lot of smart people who go and watch wrestling things and know who's going to win and going to lose because it feels obvious. So Lady Mayhem, who looks like a kind of a Fruit Loops, kind of like the toucan sand with the big nose, goes out there, and she has these small wings for her to fly out there. So I thought it was kind of a fun character. It was a fun character. So she goes out there and she's like, well, hey, like, you need to make back my money. And we had the one kid who was to put all his money on Steve. He's like, man, I can go to college. I have so much money. So now Steve is like, where the heck am I going to get all this money from? And when he's like, huh? So Steve is just like, okay, all right, let's go and do this wrestling thing that Winnie is to want. So Winnie is, of course, being this headstrong coach, and she wants to go and have Steve practice, and Steve's like, I don't practice. Like, what am I gonna do? Practice falling down? No. So Winnie, of course, is to tell Steve, it's like, well, I'm gonna put a match together, and Steve's like, well, like, I'm not gonna need to practice. Like, I think I'm fine. And so when he's like, well, fine, then we're going to have a match then. I'm going to get a match. And so Steve's like, great. So Steve is to go on to this place where there seems to be a wrestler lined up. And his name, of course, is to be Ramarilla. Ramarilla. This kind of very character that, of course, is voiced by none other than Roman Reigns, the head of the table, the guy that is with the Usos, and for I don't know how long, because things tend to change a lot in WWE, and eventually, who knows when any number of things will change. So Ramarilla is to go on and seem to be this very threatening like character, to the point where Steve is realizing that, one, he can't fake this match and just fall over and have this guy pin him. And we also have it where Winnie is to rig this match to it's like winner take all. And Steve's like, so what now? I was just hoping that I would lose this match and easily and just collect my winnings or just collect my money. And Winnie's like, no. So you have to figure out how to win this match. So I'm going to tell you how. So they realize that this character is really, really strong. So that means that he doesn't have endurance, that he's not going to last a very long time. So we just have Steve, who is to basically just chase or just be chased by this Ramarilla character and continue just going round and round into the ring. And then he gets out of the ring and just continues to run around and then make his way back into the ring. And so eventually this character just gets exhausted. And so, this match is to end up being won by Steve simply because this other character, just really just gets exhausted. So we go on and we end up having, of course, now Winnie, who wants to train Steve like her way, where it's like, oh, well, you're going to learn some moves and you're going to be just like your dad. And Steve's like, I'm not going to be just like my dad. No, you're going to have to do something else. I'm not going to do the exact same finishers. I'm not going to do the exact same signature moves. I'm not going to do the same moveset as my dad. This is not happening. So Winnie's like, well, what makes you tick? What gets you up in the morning? And so Steve is just like, well, nothing. He's like, no, seriously, there has to be something that you wake up in the morning and you want to do. And Steve is just like, well, sit around or or do this or do that. And then eventually, Steve is saying salsa. And when he's like, what do you mean, on chips? And Steve's like, well, you heard what I said. I said sofa. But, and then she's like, well, maybe you mean dancing. So all of a sudden, Winnie is to put on some salsa, and Steve just uncontrollably starts dancing because he's like, yeah, because I guess Steve was wrestling in Mexico or something, and so it seemed like he found out that was the one thing that he liked to do, was to just continue to just dance all the time. So Winnie is to realize that she's going to want to incorporate that in Steve's act, to have it be that he's basically a dancer that can kind of dance around people and basically be like a Muhammad Ali, where Muhammad Ali always kind of moved and always kind of jumped and jived and whatever, and then done these dancing moves to kind of take down his opponents. I'm talking about Steve, not Muhammad Ali. So we end up having Steve doing these weird, bizarrish dancing maneuvers, kind of doing these kind of slides with his body to just kind of knock down characters. So we have Steve going up against a character called Luchan, and they end up recycling the Lucha Dragons theme song here. The Lucha. They recycled it. I'm like, well, I guess it's a good thing that they released all those characters, so that way they can stupidly use this song here, because they gotta use the music somewhere, right? God. You know what? If I was to go on and be like Kalisto or Sin Cara, or any of the kind of like the Lucha Dragons or the Lucha, God, what were they called? Lucha House Party or whichever those guys were. Man, would I just see this as a slap in the face of just like just theme music getting replayed somewhere. And but when really looking at it, like look at NXT. Like NXT eventually you reused like certain theme musics because they just like I think Austin Creed, who eventually is like Xavier Woods, when he was in NXT, he used a theme song from one of the other wrestlers, and he went out for that in NXT for a while, and like he used it and it worked, but eventually until he got to be with the New Day, and then he changed who he was. So but anyway, so Steve is dancing through all these characters. He's dancing through Lucho, and then he goes on to face the Ting Tang twins. Just these two characters that look the same, and so he goes on to beat them. And so we have Mick and Mac who are going on and talking about how ridiculous this is, and the one monster announcer's like, "Oh no, like I love that he's using salsa and to beat these characters," and yeah, and like we have at one point that Steve ends up getting like the worst match of the week. And he's like, "Hey, I'm on TV. Like, I don't care if it's the worst. I'm on TV." Like, man, is this guy's bar set so low. So we end up having Steve having this dancing tactic that seems to continue to work. So we seem to have really just Steve kind of done here to to come back to town, come back to Stoker to eventually take on another match, another challenger, to all of a sudden find out that the arena is being closed, that the arena is to be shut down because they were told if they could sell the arena earlier, they could get a bigger payout out of this. So Winnie is desperately going to people to say like, no, I brought this monster here and he's a real contender. And so we end up having Tentacular, who is to showcase that he's to be a real villain here, a real villainous character. And so the reason why that he himself wanted this arena to be torn down is because he wants to take this arena down, because no matter what Tentacular's to do to have this world championship for X amount of days, everyone is going to go on and say that Tentacular had never fought Rayburn, and so Tentacular will always be living in Rayburn's shadow. It'll always be that whole thing of like, well, like you didn't take down Rayburn because Rayburn is dead. So, like, you basically can't fight a ghost now. So, Tentacular wants this stadium torn down because of that. And so now Steve is to go on and tell everybody, it's like, well, you know what? Technically, you will be facing a Rayburn because I'm Rayburn Jr. And everybody's like, oh, Rayburn Jr., that's his name. Because we, of course, end up having Winnie, who is to think that she's defeated here and can't be able to fix this whole arena problem. And Steve is just telling her, it's like, well, hey, just do what I did. Just change your name and run away. And when he's like, well, I can't do that. Like, I just can't leave that way because Like, I feel like I'll always still be the same person no matter where I go. So, Rayburn is not hiding from his legacy either, or his name, his real name either, and so he's going to be Rayburn Jr. here, fighting Tentacular. And so now, the whole thing of this match is it seems like Tentacular is to have really short rounded matches that are only to be lasting for 3 rounds. Hence why Winnie in the very beginning of this movie is to tell people, oh yeah, Tentacular, he's gonna beat this person in 3 rounds. Like, you better watch him beat him in 3, because that's what's gonna happen. So, we now have Rayburn Jr., who is to go and tell Tentacular, it's like, well, hey, if I last longer than 3 rounds with you, then we keep this stadium, we keep this arena, and if of course Tentacular was to lose, he's to take the stadium, the arena, and do whatever he wants with it. So we also had the moment where Steve was to get all the money that he was going to get from him wrestling. And so he almost at one point goes back to Lady Mayhem because he doesn't want to be Rayburn, and so we have it where Lady Mayhem is telling Steve that he's gonna lose again, and so Steve just kind of gets tired of that. Steve just kind of goes, you know what, like, I like winning. Like, I like not having a fixed outcome. And so that's when Steve goes back with Winnie and is to just start going on and doing whatever she wants. But now, so we have Steve going and fighting Tentacular. And so it seems that Tentacular is to figure out Steve's tactics, his weird dancing tactic. Tentacular is to figure that out because Steve had gone on to go through this gauntlet or this relay race to kind of go through and like make it to this one statue, and eventually he makes it there, but he has to go through so many obstacle course like things to avoid and duck and dive and ditch and dodge and whatever. But eventually he does get to this statue. But now, since Tentacular is going and doing the exact same tactic that Steve is doing, then they're like, oh my god, what are we going to do now? And so now we have it where Winnie is to come up with a strategy to just be like, wait a minute. Like, we're going to go on and do certain dance moves, but then we're also going to do, like, go back to, like, our father's old playbooks and kind of do certain things that our dads had done at one point to kind of combine, like, the fact of kind of confusing, of course, Tentacular here. So, because at first we just have Tentacular that is to face off with Steve, and Steve kind of dodges everything and maneuvers through everything. And so, like, for the whole first round, Steve wasn't even touched by Tentacular. And they're like, yeah, we're doing it. We're going to beat him. And then eventually Tentacular comes up with this strategy of doing the dance moves himself. And so now we have Steve going in there, changing it up quite a bit. And so this is starting to work. And so, but it also seems that Steve is kind of getting beaten up by Tentacular also. So we go on, and what is to happen here is that Steve is to realize that Tentacular does have a weakness, his tentacles. So Steve goes and licks these tentacles of Tentacular, sticks them on some ring post, and then goes onto the top rope and is going to use some maneuver. And Tentacular goes and grabs this one small chair and smacks Steve with it, having Steve all of a sudden kind of like go and like body collide with Tentacular. And so it seems that both of them are to kind of be knocked out at this moment. But then we have Steve who ends up getting up, and so it seems that we have a moment here where eventually Steve is to get the win over Tentacular. And so now we end up finding out that Steve is to be the new champion. And so he's holding the belt and he's like, yeah, I want to beat him, yeah. And so they get to keep the arena and so on and so forth. And so we also had that weird moment where the king was to be fearful of going back into wrestling. I guess he was to retire. The king that Tentacular had faced and lost. So we had that one goofy moment. We also had the one moment where Winnie was to go and have Steve go on and face this, like, I'm assuming Japanese wrestler that seemed to be kind of like the biggest monsterish character, where Steve had to go with Axe Hammer and kind of test to be able to like figure out how to lift this character. And Steve does, but then kind of accidentally like chucks the character like into the stands, and everybody's like scrambling to avoid being like squashed by this monster. But like it seems that the monster ends up getting knocked out, and then like they go for a 10 count, and like Steve wins. That's the one thing that I forgot about. But yeah, so when he was telling Steve that they're gonna have Froyo after this, and so I guess after they win, they end up getting a lot of Froyo, and there's some like end credit scene where they're going and having a bunch of Froyo, and Winnie is saying like, "Well, hey, uh, like we're gonna have practice tomorrow at such and such time," and Steve's like, "No, I don't think I can make it." I don't know, like no, no. So like Steve like pretends that he's like dead or something like that, so that way he can avoid this practice. So really, that's just how the movie just kind of ends, with this seemingly happy ending and this kind of stereotypical movie where you kind of have to adapt to be able to win. So with that said, I think that's all I wanted to say about this movie. I want to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.